soon we will be embarking on a journey together. As a congregation, we will wander and make our way through the Gospel of Mark sequentially. And I can think of no better place to start than at the end. Yes, I believe in the journey more than the destination, so I see no sin in sneaking a peek by skipping to the last page of a good story. So, our text for this day, the finale of the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe and sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. This is the good news.
Praise be to you, O Christ.
Now, if you're reading along in your Bible, you'll see that there are several more verses. But that is the end, as Mark intends it. That is the end of the good news of Jesus Christ. Scholars pretty much all agree that Mark ends his story there. It seems that the rest was added in the late 2nd or early 3rd century. Tradition adds a resurrection narrative here, filling in our hope. But after much study, I think that addition of tradition may close some doors for us. So on this day when we gather to worship our risen Christ, we're confronted with a difficult challenge, a gospel without a scene that includes the risen Christ. Mark is the oldest surviving written good news of Jesus our Christ, and it is also the only gospel without a birth narrative and without an appearing and speaking resurrected Christ. Now let me be clear. I do not believe that Mark didn't believe in the risen Christ. Historically speaking, something occurred within the Christian community around the time of Jesus' death that caused the followers to begin worshiping Jesus. Something happened at the time of Jesus' death that gave that community the power to become a real serious religious movement. Stories were spreading everywhere about sightings of the risen Jesus. There's no reason to believe that Mark also didn't believe these stories of the risen Jesus. It's much easier to assume that Mark knew these stories, Mark believed these stories, and Mark knew his audience knew these stories and were familiar with them, and for some reason deliberately chose not to include one of those stories. I also want to be very clear about just how dark of an ending to a story Mark is giving us. Verse 1, when the Sabbath was over, the named ladies brought spices to go and anoint him. The women do this because they're expecting a dead body. They do not expect a risen Christ. Mistake number 1. Verse 3, they had been saying to each other, "Who will roll away the stone tomb. They're consumed with their fear and their worry, and again, expecting a dead body. Verse 5, on entering the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe, and they were struck with, some translations will say amazement, but I looked it up in Greek, and it says to throw into amazement or terror, to alarm thoroughly, to terrify. These women are terrified. And then, of course, there's the very last verse of the good news of Jesus Christ according to Mark. The women came out and ran away because they were frightened out of their wits. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. How do we reconcile this emphasis on fear? How do we live with this dark ending? How is that good news? Well, let me ask you, how does that ending make you feel? I mean, all of us here, we all know that's not how the story ends. The story goes on, right? I mean, we all know Jesus is seen again. We all know how much Christianity has changed the world for thousands of years since this scene went down. So what feelings does that stir in you, this ending of fear and silence? Now, I'll admit to one of my favorite books. It's Gone with the Wind. Spoiler alert. Gone with the Wind leaves me feeling the same way at the end as Mark's Gospel. The whole book, the main character, Scarlet, is such a selfish, blind idiot, despite all of her good qualities. Finally, you're 3 pages from the end of this 1,000+ page tome. And finally, she wakes up and she sees the love that's been standing before her since page 101. Finally, she opens her eyes and she opens her heart to him. And then, of course, that famous, fateful answer from him. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And after 1,000+ pages, your heart just screams, no! That's it? That's all? You're going to end it like that? For decades, thousands of fans begged Margaret Mitchell to give them more. And in typical Jesus fashion, when Mark takes us to that place where our hearts are begging him to give us more, Mark turns that duty over to us. Mark knows that we know that the story keeps building. So Mark gives us the blessing of an opportunity and the blessing of a challenge. Mark knows he could never write the end of this story because we keep writing this story every day. Every year, every generation, every century, every millennia. The end is still for Jesus to write, but until then, we continue to be the authors of this story. The blessing of opportunity and challenge from Mark, the anger we feel at this ending, motivates us to take up the story ourselves. We will be the storytellers of the sightings of the risen Christ. We see the risen Christ when we resurrect others from pain and suffering. We see the risen Christ when we resurrect ourselves from selfish living. And then we will be the risen Christ others will see. And I want to share with you some of the beauty of the Greek that we miss in the English. Verse 7 says, the angel tells the women that they will see Jesus. Well, in English, we have lots of words for to see, right? You can glimpse, you can glance, you can stare, you can understand. So I went and looked up this word in the Greek. I found that the word used, orao, can mean to perceive by the eye, to catch sight of or notice, to see a vision, to see someone in the course of making a friendly call, to visit, to experience a condition or event, to witness, to be mentally or spiritually perceptive, to perceive. The word used here in this place is not the word associated with to fix one's gaze or to look at. It is not the word for to pay attention or to be alert or on guard. So the good news is that the disciples get to look forward to catching sight of Jesus, noticing him, visiting with him, experiencing him. It's not seeing Jesus in the sense of looking for him, though. They look forward to the chance encounter, the bump into. They look forward to the experience, the witness of Jesus. And so do every single one of us. We don't let this story end because we are resurrected and upheld by the chance encounters with Jesus. Those moments you walk away from a chance encounter thinking, wow, that was intense. My heart was burning within me as I spoke, and as I leave, my mind continues to race. I am changed. The challenging gospel ending gives us the good news that restoration of discipleship is available in spite of failure. All through the gospel, the disciples fail, just like we keep doing, because we're all human. But the second to last verse tells us that the disciples and us, we will see him again and again in this way. We will catch sight of an experience that will leave us witnesses. Witnesses that selfish living leads to emptiness, but somehow emptying ourselves in love makes life so full. We've all lived the joy of that changed life. So when that damning action comes next, the women running away, silent in fear, all the experience within each of us knows we cannot let the story end there. So despite our past failures, despite knowing we will all have more failures, we still take up this story and make sure it continues. We make sure those in this world, more and more of them who do not know what our good news is really about, we make sure they know we have seen and experienced the risen Christ. So how do we play out this story? Well, in a world rife with greed and fear like ours, such a world is a world of ample opportunities for grace. The harvest is plentiful. Are the laborers few? The love of God seeks to grow. Unfortunately, there's no one answer I can just stand up here and spout at you about how we can be the resurrection. We all wish we had that one answer. We'd do it, right? But our sacred stories do tell about how if we work with and for one another, coming together because we care, gathering in community, because we are trying our hardest to love our neighbor, wanting to help them all, especially the least among us, salvation will be found. Now, I've done some research on family systems theory. A basic tenet of family systems theory is that you really can't change another's behavior. You just can't. All you can do is change your own behavior and your response to others' behavior. Now, your change might cause a change in another, but really you can't make that change happen in another. I think this theory holds some value for us on our resurrection day. We cannot completely change or eradicate evil. Even Jesus said, "The poor will be with you always." But we can change our response to evil. We can change our complacency, our feeling frozen in the face of the largeness of the problems of the world. And our change can make a difference. It will matter. We are in a position to make change just by changing our behavior. Taking seriously the call to come together and pray and act as a family, we will make serious change. Christians account for 33% of the world's population. Just focusing on changing ourselves, worshiping together, praying for our enemies, loving our neighbor, tithing for the work of God. Such dramatic change would be impossible not to notice, and impossible not to spark more change. But we're not all called to do the same thing. That's why God calls us into communities. We're called into communities so we can all support one another on our separate journeys and share about our different journeys and get excited and challenge one another and be challenged. And remind one another always never to forget the need all around us. Because there is so much need. And yet this is also a time when many are emerging with a care and concern so deep it's beginning to completely define them. I went down to visit one of my friends in D.C. over the winter. While I was there, one of her friends mentioned that she had a hankering to spread some grace. She had been asking her friends for extra jackets so that she and her young daughter could take them to the homeless in the city. Not organized by any group or movement, she was just moved by the need that she saw to spread some grace, to be a helping hand. The only problem was, after about an hour and a half of driving around downtown D.C., we couldn't find any homeless folk wandering the streets or in the parks. From the back seat, I, as the guest, and not so familiar with D.C., tried to sheepishly mention that they might be at their current Occupy site. This was before their eviction. In frustration and running out of gas, they thought as a last resort they would take up my suggestion and just check out the Occupy encampment. There we found 50, maybe 100 homeless folk, all lined up and receiving a hot meal from a food truck. There was a bit of a mad rush for our meager wares, but hopefully they made it into needful hands. Being a pastor, I do like to try to keep in touch with what's going on in the world in the realms of grace. And there is a lot going on. The Occupy and 99% movements are bringing to the limelight the diffuse and profuse need of so many average people suffering just from daily living. Right in our own backyard, Occupy Philly, they were able to accomplish the feat of serving 1,500 hot meals a day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, available to anyone with need, sustained for months until the city shut them down. People, right here, spending, doing, giving to help other people. People are seeing the need and wanting to work together to help and make change. We need to start loving instead of fearing. Change can only come when we open our hearts to the wonders of love. Our sacred stories are all about how if we work with and for one another, coming together because we care, gathering in community because we're trying our hardest to love our neighbors, wanting to help them all, especially the least among us, wanting them all to know how amazing grace feels. If we do this together, salvation will be. And we should want that most of all on this day when we celebrate receiving all we know of grace, forgiveness, and new life. Not because of our unique goodness, but because of grace unbounded in the empty tomb. What comes out is up to us. What will come out of the tomb? Who will believe that we have seen the risen Christ? It's such a radically illogical thing that we say. Who will believe it? Those who see our irrational acts of unbounded love. They will know the story goes on. Mark's finale was not the final word. Something did spark after that. The risen Christ changed the world. We even base our year on him. Mark blesses us with a challenge. How will we take up the story in the hearts of others? Your witness can be seed, soil, sustenance, and sunlight for resurrection. The women came out and ran away from the tomb because they were frightened out of their wits and said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. What will happen next? This is your story to finish. Amen.
Now, if anybody wants to move